Hello everybody and welcome back to the Tomb Raider Underworld walkthrough. It is time for the second DLC pack, Lara's Shadow, which is easily the better DLC pack of the two. I mean, obviously you can see by the fact that the length is technically double that of, or at least you will be able to see by the time it's done, that it is double the length of Beneath the Ashes, but there's also a bunch of interesting gameplay stuff that happens, because we actually get to play as Lara's doppelganger. And we get to find out what happened to her after this moment and what brought her to Beneath the Ashes of Croft Manor in Beneath the Ashes. So, yeah, we get to play as the doppelganger, which is really cool. The doppelganger is still voiced by Keely Hawes. It's a much deeper tone, and there's some voice modulation stuff that goes on. And the objective / hint thing that keeps turning up, or at least will do, can get rather annoying. But sometimes it will reveal plot, sometimes it will reveal hints. But you also get a nice little tutorial of how to control Lara's doppelganger. Because there is new gameplay stuff, because basically she is much more athletic than Lara, and she has this thing called shadow power, which you can use to scramble up rock veins like these and not fall down. It can also be used for slowing down time and just generally being a badass. It will also be used in combat, which is helpful. But yes. Now, there are also treasures and artifacts in this DLC as well, and there are also achievements for collecting them all. It's a bit more frustrating because you are pretty much entirely in Helheim, which is obviously a little bit dark, and because you don't have a light, yeah, you can see how well that ends sometimes. And yeah. Now, one thing that I find rather hilarious is that obviously a lot of people complained about the lack of combat in Tomb Raider Underworld. Well, Lara's Shadow brought combat in quite massively, so be prepared for so much fighting. Now, there is this sort of slightly poor melee combat. It's really not great. It's just quite clunky and slow. But you can also use the shadow meter to execute special attacks, either with your punch or your kick, which can be quite damaging, but if anything, the thing that I ended up finding the most helpful was the sort of a shadow fire thing. It's like using your guns and slowing down time and shooting, because you can use the doppelganger's guns. And trust me, they will be very, very, very helpful at numerous points. The other nice thing about Lara's doppelganger, good grief, is that she has regenerating health. which is very, very, very helpful. Especially considering the amount of battling you're going to be doing throughout this. Because it's ridiculous. And now this is the whole thing about Shadowfire. So you can still shoot at things, which is quite nice. I don't know whether I'm going to use Shadowfire at all just yet. But it is something that I definitely use later on. Now, I would say that this is probably a little bit more glitchy than Beneath the Ashes. I think because they had all this new gameplay stuff and a massive amount of combat, things just got a little bit ridiculous. But either way, it's a really cool DLC pack, and it is the only bit of DLC that I had played for many, many years. Like, I've never really been one for downloadable content. It's cool, it's just that I just like my games when they are complete packages when I buy them. That's not to say that I never buy DLC. I mean, obviously I bought Lara's Shadow, and I did also end up buying Darth Vader for Soul Calibur 4. But I don't think I actually ended up buying much other DLC. In fact, I'm really struggling to think of any that I've really bought over the years. Which is kind of sad, but then again, it's such an easily abusable system, and it has been really badly abused by publishers, that it has lost a lot of its meaning and potential. Because DLC isn't inherently bad, especially when it's content that is created after the game has been finished, that just they want to do to expand things. Like, I'm totally fine with new story content, it's just, it's nice to know that it's not been just, like, announced immediately as the game itself was announced. Because then that just looks like you're bringing the game out early and then making us pay for the rest of the content, which is a bit naff. Now, I believe I said, probably in the first part of Beneath the Ashes, but I think that Nintendo has sort of, kind of got their DLC game together. Because they're actually creating content that's worth a damn. And that you actually want to buy and it's actually worth the money. But Natla survived. And she's really not looking good. She's had better days, has Natla.
Take me back to your birthplace, now.
But, as we can see, Lara's doppelganger is not quite as free-willed as you may have thought. Because she's directly under the control of Natla. Under the well, when the phrase Arkeshiva is stated. And that's obviously the magic words that Lara was seeking in Beneath the Ashes, and which she obviously used. And I do quite appreciate that Lara's Shadow and Beneath the Ashes are interconnected. I just wish that perhaps there had been a little bit more closure on Lara's side of the story. Because really, the way that they ended Beneath the Ashes is nowhere near as satisfying as the end of Lara's Shadow will end up being, although it is a wee bit grim and dark. But we are now set our first goal, which is to restore power to this machine. Now, I am pretty sure that, well, Lara's Shadow DLC was certainly criticised for one very specific thing, and that was that it reuses so many areas. Obviously this place is new, but the way the game, well, the way the DLC is set up is that you will go through this area once, and then we will have to come back through it going the complete opposite direction. It's not a bad technique, but it's a bit lazy if you ask me. Now, in the grand scheme of things, Lara's Shadow was certainly much better received than Beneath the Ashes. For example, while Beneath the Ashes got a 5 out of 10 from IGN, Lara's Shadow got an 8 out of 10. But it was still pretty down on its luck. Gaining most reviews, I think, around like the 6 out of 10s of the ones it got. Which is hardly surprising, because it's a bit... yeah, just the same as Beneath the Ashes was, although Beneath the Ashes was so much shorter and really not as new, because this has the added bonus of a new type of gameplay in the combat, a new type of platforming, and actually decent kind of plot stuff happening. It's still nowhere near as probably good as it could have been, but the fact that there's actually plot that happens is quite nice. I mean, the way that the IGN review split things up was that it got an 8 for presentation, because it weaves together all the plots, and it gives the doppelganger kind of it's an interesting twist, because you get to begin to understand this very silent murderer that killed Alistair, that blew up Croft Manor, and it actually kind of does something with her. Gave it an 8 out of 10 for the graphics, because while it's exactly the same as Underworld, there is a bigger sense of scale, which you will see somewhat soon, I think. Only got a 7.5 for sound, because there's very little spoken dialogue, and apart from that it's pretty much all repurposed from previous cutscenes from the game, from the original game. The gameplay got an 8 out of 10, it's because of the larger focus on combat and exploration, and IGN said that it feels like a return to classic Tomb Raider play elements, and in some ways that comparison isn't wrong, because in many ways, I've just repeated my phrasing there, but oh well, the doppelganger is very similar to the Lara of the first Tomb Raider games, because you have the braided hair, the slightly redder tinge to the hair. You also have the slightly ridiculous platforming abilities. And also, you have a rather more sort of blunt and brutal outlook on things. And I mean also, there is a bit of the Angel of Darkness about her, but still. And then it also got an 8 out of 10 for lasting appeal, because although it's short, and technically you're probably going to be spending about double the amount of time that you'd be spending on Beneath the Ashes. It's still something that you may want to come back to for speedruns, or to try and find different ways to improve your time with impromptu time trials. There's a very specific reason for that being because there is an achievement for a time trial, which you get for getting through this particular run. So I can't remember quite where it starts, but I think it's from the door to basically the first actual save platform. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get it. I tried, like, by reloading my save and stuff, but it didn't unlock. I'm assuming it's because I maybe didn't go fast enough or something. I don't know. It's slightly frustrating, especially because it's quite a long platforming section. And what's really also mean is that, unlike the speed demon achievements in the main game, which told you exactly how much time you had to complete your task, this is all very vague. It's like it just says get to... I can't remember the specific wording, but it's just like complete this thing in a certain amount, like very quickly or something. It's not as clear as get to the gate at the bottom, well, get to Valgrind in 50 seconds or whatever. It's nowhere near that specific, which is just mean. And they do it again later on, because, oh god, I think it's the refinery speedrun, although that might be this one. Basically, there's one where you've got to rush back through the corridor which leads to the birthing chamber, and that is also party to this slightly dodgy wording. It's really not clear and it's not great. But we've ended up on this platform, which is huge, and there is a lot of combat that happens. Or at least, I seem to recall there being more combat. I don't quite know why that guy took so long to spawn. I mean, you can probably already tell that the amount of combat in this game is just ridiculous. The kind of ended up going completely the other way. So in the main game there was perhaps too little combat, but here there's way too much. And I think the IGN review states that it's maybe perhaps about half the experience. And it is ridiculous. But thankfully that bit of combat is over with for now. There's probably only 3 more battles for this part. But we are heading to try and get this thing working. Or at least get it so that stuff is flowing, because to get everything working we need to get the ATIA flowing to a certain location, and then stuff can happen. But then there's the slightly frustrating thing of we're just going to be spending our entire time in this sort of location. I mean, it's very impressive because it's huge. And I'd say it's probably, well, vertically, they are the largest spaces in the entirety of Tomb Raider Underworld. So they're very impressive. But it's just the fact that we are going to be coming back here, and it's just, you've seen it once, and then it's just like, well, I've seen it once now. it's lost a little bit of its magic, shall we say. And really, that's kind of a lot of my problems with Lara's Shadow, is that it can get very repetitive and very tedious. I mean, that's probably the same that could be said for my commentary. But it's just the fact that you end up doing so much of the same stuff over and over again, that even though there is all this new stuff going on, it doesn't quite have any of the same magic. But, quite nicely, we've picked up the wonderful relic there. I wasn't quite expecting it to be getting it so soon, but we do, and that is great. Now, something that I do find to be really awesome about the whole thing is that we do get to play as Lara's doppelganger, because obviously in the original Tomb Raider and in Anniversary, they had the doppelganger there, and that was terrifying, because it was sort of just this muscular mimic, which did just directly mimic things, and you had to trick it into killing itself. So the fact that there is a much more advanced version come Underworld, it's just very impressive, and also terrifying that Natla decided to create this. Now, apparently, well, there's fan theories of what the heck was happening. More specifically about Anniversary than I think here. But basically, one of the possible explanations for the existence of the Atlantean copy of Lara is, well, it's that it's a trap specifically designed by the Atlanteans and or Natla to trick Lara into killing herself, or at least making it impossible to pass. But then, having said that, it's kind of very unlikely that that would be the case, because Natla thinks Lara's dead by that point in Anniversary. And it seems very unlikely that the mutant would be hatched on the off chance that Lara would show up. So because it mimicked Lara's movements, there's the suggestion that maybe it had just hatched and was learning or programming itself by copying the first thing it saw. At that point it didn't, well, in the original game it didn't really resemble Lara at all, in the Anniversary version it did more so. And its encounter with Lara may have been an unfortunate accident. And also when you kill it, it screams and flails and has sort of, Lara indicates that it has some kind of self-awareness and realises that it's going to die, meaning that it wasn't just copying Lara. So, you already have there kind of the core of this doppelganger's self-awareness.
The center structure looks like it plugs into the ceiling and powers the healing chamber.
Because, yeah, if that very, very early doppelganger had a hint of self-awareness, then clearly this one does too, especially considering it is much more advanced. And I guess that kind of brings in a whole massive ethical argument that I don't have time to go into in this part, but I may end up bringing up as a nice discussion topic for the next part, as we get this thing working. Hopefully it won't take us too long.